Join me in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to give a lesson, based just on Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, just on that verse. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters. So I'm about to go to Genesis chapter 1 just real quick. I know I said, but this is all like right off, like on off the bat, like right now, like this message, this lesson that God is wanting me to do is just right off the bat. And so I'm, gathering my thoughts. But here in Genesis 2, it says, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. Did you catch that? Highlight or underline, whatever. Covered the deep waters. Okay, so we know that the earth, right there, it's saying that the earth was founded by water, first off. And I'm going to go back to that. So now, here in verse 11, it says all the underground waters. So now we know that because the earth was, pretty much founded, by water. Now this makes sense. All the underground waters erupted from the earth. And that's really what I want to talk about, is the waters erupted from the earth. So what creates a eruption, first off? Because that's all we get from the Bible. That's really all we get, is that the waters erupted. But what creates eruptions? It would have to be an earthquake. Like, don't you understand? In order for, waters to erupt from the earth has to split. There has to be a split somewhere in the earth. And that split would have to have been created from a massive earthquake. And we know that this is possible because, one, earthquakes happen all the time. But then sometimes when there's earthquakes, the earth sometimes does, collapse itself. We have seen evidence of that. And so knowing that there is evidence of, one, everybody knows that there's evidence of earthquakes. And then two, knowing that sometimes when you get a strong enough earthquake, part of the earth can crack. And then that earth can, basically like pretty much fall, collapse itself, and you have this giant hole. And there are evidences of that. So we know that that can happen. But how do you get underground waters to erupt from the earth? Well, you have to start out with an earthquake. An earthquake putting a crack. So I have a globe here. In this globe, I mean, if you go to Google Earth, you can go to Google Earth, go straight up to the Atlantic, the North Atlantic and South Atlantic Ocean. And you're going to see the crack. You're gonna see where it starts, and I will tell you where that crack starts. It starts right at the North Pole. I mean that the crack actually starts right up at the North Pole, and it goes down through. It kind of curves. It basically cuts out, like curves around here, and then curves around here down. It actually works its way down to about there ish, and then kind of back up through here. And then it actually comes back out. That same crack, comes back out. You can follow it on Google Earth. And then it kind of comes back out, and then it goes up through here, through the Red Sea. And that suggests that that's how the Middle East was created. If you follow the crack on the split from Google Earth, you can come to conclusion that that's how the Middle East was created. And then also you can almost picture before the flood there would have been only one ocean. So before the flood, there actually would have been land. So there's an ocean that connects, or that is in between, doesn't connect, that's in between the Americas, South America, North America, and Africa and Europe. And why would there be an ocean there? The flood created that. The crack that starts way up in the North Pole came all the way down to just about the Southern Ocean before coming back up and around Africa, and then through the Middle East. And so you start out with an earthquake. The earthquake created the crack in the earth. Are you following me? It created, and I say this with emphasis because we need to know this. A lot of us, we think that there would have been, just as much earth as there is to, like, no, there would have been more. Because the one thing that you have to understand that people, um it's just that I have seen something that they have missed. It's not that they're wrong, well, except for one part. The continents did not split. The continents were already, so technically, if there was an ocean, the continents would have already been split before the flood. It's just that the earthquake created that crack, and then the earth collapsed because of that. So the earth that was once connecting the um, Americas and the um, um, Atlantic, um, the South Pole. I had a moment. I can't think of that. Um, all of that was connected before the flood. And what happened was, again, earthquake. You have that split. Then you have the earth that collapsed. Now, obviously, you have earthquake and then the earth split, and because there was a eruption, you know you have lava and magma that just poof, gushed out from you know the earth, obviously, as well. So you have the earthquake again. You have the earthquake that sets all of this off into motion. But then, so you have the earthquake, you have the eruption, but then you have the collapse in the earth. And because the collapse in the earth is the reason why there is water between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and then also the South Pole, Antarctica. Um, but then also Australia would have been, so there would have, so you get from all of this happening, you get the North Atlantic Ocean, South Atlantic Ocean, Southern Ocean, and Indian Ocean, all coming from the earthquake, the split, the eruption, the collapse in the earth, and then the waters, because the earth is founded by water, and the earth collapsed, obviously it collapsed deep enough so that water, rose up above. Um, so then, really, you have the rains that rained 40 days and 40 nights to finish it off. At this point, at this point, you basically have almost the entire world just by the earthquake and the earth splitting, and then the collapse and the water coming out of where the earth, collapsed, you have the majority of the earth already, like within possibly a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most. I don't know if it would have taken that long, but with just, within a few minutes, you already have the vast majority of, the earth covered in water. And then you have on top of that, you have the 40 days and 40 nights that would have, covered um, the peaks, the mountains. And there would have been mountains. They wouldn't have been nearly as high of mountains that are, today, in today's time. But there would have been mountains. And really, you wouldn't have got, these really. So after the flood, or really after, like sometime after it was done raining, you have another earthquake that most likely happened while the entire earth was underwater. Well, guess what? Guess what's going to happen? That earth that is underwater, the highest peaks at the time, before earthquakes happen to elevate those peaks to the height that they are today, creating the Everglades. You have the entire earth underwater. Then you have, I don't know how many earthquakes, but I don't know, maybe quite a few. I don't know exactly, but you have earthquakes. Well, because the earth is underwater and the earthquakes are happening underwater, guess what's going to happen? Tsunamis. Tsunamis are going to happen, and those tsunamis are going to carry settlement, and they're going to, lay down um, layers. They're going to carry layers, and they're going to lay those layers down. But then the second thing that's going to happen is because you have earth underneath the water and you have earthquakes. Well, now, you know what happens when you have earthquakes. You know, we all know that. That the earth goes, you get an earthquake and go like that. Like, or technically, what happens is a plate will go over the top of one plate, or the one plate will go, you know, underneath another, and lifting the earth up, lifting, you know, wherever that plate sits, that is where that earth is going to rise. Um, and obviously, that's what would have happened underwater. So you can picture, this is the earth and this is the water. You can picture there being earthquakes and it going, and it the earth rising. So now you have mountain peaks that are above sea level. So um, obviously, from there, um, well, you can see why Noah's Ark, when it got to um, the mount, when it got to the mount in Turkey, um, obviously that's probably the reason why the ark came to rest, is because an earthquake probably brought that above sea level. And you can go on Google Earth, type in Noah's Ark, and Noah's Ark is pointing east to west. Like, and I get it. There's some people that are going to be like, well, you don't know which way is like the front of the ark, and you don't know. But I will tell you, like, boats, the front of the boat is, mostly, pointed. A little bit more pointed in the front of the boat than in the back. Um, and so you can almost picture, just by looking at Google Earth, where the front of the Noah's Ark would be. And it's facing, it's not facing west, it's facing east. And I'm not going to go into that whole detail. I'm not going to go into that whole rabbit hole, but I do have videos that, suggest that the ark, Noah's Ark, probably came from, you know, um, the land that we call America. And again, I'm not going to get into that whole detail, but I do have videos on my channel. If you just go to my channel, you might have to scroll down a ways. But I also have playlists that are old, but they're still, or should have. I don't know if I deleted those or not, but um, if I do, you could just go to a playlist. If I don't, you might have to scroll down a bit. But yeah, that's another thing that I have found on Google Earth. And so, but you can clearly see that, yeah, obviously a mountaintop being created by an earthquake, now risen risen above sea level, that would cause the ark to come to a rest, which would probably be the reason why it, stopped at Turkey, at the place we call modern day Turkey. Um, so yeah, just an interesting fact is when you look at it um, deeper. Um, Again, looking at Google Earth, you can see the crack, kind of shaping and coming down almost, kind of to the south ocean, and it actually does go around Africa. It goes around Africa and then straight up through the Middle East. So I'm going to ask the question, does that really suggest that the Earth kind of split apart? Now, yes, there's a split, but what I'm saying is the continents. Think about the continents. Does that really suggest that the continents were, together and then the earth split and then over time like think about this further. Um no, not really. Because when you add the simple fact that we know that like you have a earthquake that creates a split in the earth, we know that there is evidence that earth does, at times when there's earthquakes big enough, it does collapse. It does kind of fall in on itself, creating a huge hole. And so when you think about that and you take in consideration of everything that I just said, because you got to take into consideration the crack didn't just happen, doesn't just start up in the North Pole and go through the North Atlantic and South Atlantic Ocean and stop. It doesn't stop there. No, it goes down. Like, obviously, it curves around the continents and it goes down through the South Ocean and then back up through, and it literally cuts Africa right out. And so when you take that into consideration, no, the continents were always there. The continents were always there. What happened is you have that earthquake, you have that split, and then earth collapsed and water gushed out from that. Um, and like I said before the flood, you have earth that was there, that collapsed in. And so, really, the only ocean at the time would have been the Pacific Ocean. The North Pacific and South Pacific Oceans. I mean, technically it's the same ocean, but we like to break it up in, north and south. But, technically it's, you know, and that would have separated the Australia and Asia, China and Asia from Canada, America, Mexico, and South America. So the only water separating land at the time, kind of separating land, um, was the North Pacific Ocean. You know, you have Asia and Australia, pretty much sitting right where they're sitting now. Um, and then on this end, um, and then the the Americas, sitting here in an ocean. And see, another very interesting, and I have to add this in before I get off because I kind of forgot about this. But looking at my globe, I started like I saw these islands, and it just reminded me. I mean, you can kind of see those islands there. It reminded me of the simple fact that there are thousands and thousands of islands in the ocean. Like just sticking out of the ocean. I mean, you have New Guinea, you have, well, Australia is a continent that's basically a also an island, but it's a big enough to be a continent. But you have, all of these islands, and then you have islands that are even too small to actually see from a globe point of view. Like when you're looking at the globe, they're just, you know, but as you zoom in, obviously, you would be able to see that there are islands. Islands. Now, how do islands get in the middle of the ocean? How do they get in the middle of the ocean? Yes, again, possible that you have earthquakes, that, the plates, from these earthquakes, got them. That's possible. But, and that's probably one of the two things that happen. So go back to what I said about the earth collapsing. Now, obviously, the earth collapsing, there's still going to be, so-called islands that are still going to stand, from all of this earth. Like you can picture the earth collapsing, in different areas. And, from this, there's little, islands. And because really, how do islands get created if, because let's just, for example, if New Guinea, if it collapsed with the rest of the earth, it would not be here. Um, even with the earthquakes, even with one plate going beneath one plate, lifting, and that's one way, obviously, because obviously that's how we have continents. Because the continents were also risen from these earthquakes. So these earthquakes, you know, they, but what I am clearly saying is that you do not have these islands, these small little islands that you see in the ocean. You don't even have those if they collapsed. So obviously, they're still within the area of Earth that would have, collapsed itself. You still have these, islands, and you have water, covering. And then after the 40 days and 40 nights, you have these earthquakes that rise the um, that rise the earth, not just the continents, but they're rising like And that's really how you get an island. Because the island didn't collapse with the rest of the earth, obviously. If it did, there wouldn't be any islands in the middle of the ocean. And hopefully, I put enough emphasis on everything, on every point that I was, you know, talking about here, for people to understand and grasp that it's not the yes, it was one big continent. It was one big continent. The globe was one continent, but it wasn't, there was no, there was already a, a separate, like there didn't need to be a separation because you have a collapse. Once the earth collapsed and you have those waters, and then after the flood you have the earthquakes that rose, that brought the earth up above sea level. That's all you need. You don't need there to be a separation. So that's just an interesting thought, and I know it's, you know I'm making this, and it's, you know it's about like an hour away from my bedtime, but anyways, I felt led to make a video because I felt led by, like, the Holy Spirit was telling me I gotta make a video on this because people, they need to know that, hey, it's possible that, people that are, creationists, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, I'm just saying that it's possible that they missed a few things, and it's possible that I have found the things that they have missed, and all I'm doing is being the messenger. So I hope that you have been able to learn, something new.